Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the training round of BBPC 2018. I'm Brooke. I'm Jerry. You all know the motion. Prime Minister. Big here. You're not talking from there, right?
Okay.
Just be live stream. Unless
Alright.
some changes.
Which? Remember. Can I get to it? Because I'm not sure if it's enough.
Let me just talk that.
Yeah, sorry, it's a lot of notes. Yes, wait. All right. We think that historical sites are only good if it's the right tool to be used at the right time. We think that at a point in which historical sites depict the sort of atrocities or human rights violations that literally were the point of which people were miserable at that circumstance, I think fundamentally the ones who are affected must demand for the sort of destruction of that particular historical site. And like looking at the context of this particular debate, where we see that this historical context depicts such as atrocities that happened within your Holocaust period, we think that the Jewish community fundamentally are the ones who are most affected. We think at that point in time, they must be the one to advocate for the destruction of this particular sites in the end of the day. But I think first need to clarify, as a Jewish community, what are sort of interest or incentive structures that they have. Firstly, we think that they have to be sort of comfortable within what are the sort of things that they see, and as well as when they know that there's like a rising kind of sentiment of anti-Semitism, they think if at a point in which they think that this historical sites entrench sort of sentiment, that is the point in which they would demand for the sort of abolishment of these particular things, right? So, like, I think number one, we need to look at firstly, how is it that these sites are a constant kind of reminder that harms the ability for your Jewish individuals to move on? I think first we need to characterize how are these particular historical sites look like and what is it that people will most likely react to it. We think that first, the physical manifestation of these particular sites that depict sort of killings that particularly happen triggers sort of pain and the sort of like agony of this particular, like maybe their ancestors or the individuals that were affected within this the circumstance. So what's the use of the historical site in the end of the day? We don't think that these sites do any particular purpose to like consolidate them. We think that it just makes them like sad even more, just to see that it happens and to see that their ancestors died in that particular circumstance. So what happens if you don't remove these sort of things or the sort of sites? We think that number one, it relieves the sort of trauma that they have because they are always kind of reminded of the atrocities or the sufferings that their ancestors go through because they can see it happening within or imagine it happening when they go to that particular sites in the end, right? So what would we rather want on our side of the house? We think that when you abolish this particular sites, you still have maybe scholarly journals that talk about this in every day. Why do we think that that's a better alternative? We think that number one, it allows for like an in-depth kind of explanation as to what is it that this site essentially is. It is moving the sort of emotion that a particular individual would kind of have if they were to see it firsthand, right? So I think the second argument that we're talking about is that the ability for your particular Jewish community to control the discussions as well. Because understand that when you don't have your Jewish individual at that point where you have people going to these particular historical sites, they would make assumptions as to why is it that Jewish maybe deserve these particular things that happen to them. You take away that the moment in which people have to opt into Googling it per se, where they will be directed towards an explanation as to why was it bad or why was it that it wasn't necessarily good at that particular circumstance. That's a better kind of way of discussion for people to know rather than just to go and see what's happening and just assume things in their minds in the end. We think that the point of reference in this particular point is particularly important because it comes with a sort of extensive research that comes from these particular scholars journals who write these things. It's the ability for them to explain why is it that this Holocaust happened or why is it that it is particularly bad in that point onwards, right? So I think as well, why do we think that that also creates a kind of accurate and detailed explanation rather than having to depend on someone's being like altruistic to read that one script from the monument or that one script from your historical site? We don't think that people like have a national incentive to want to do that in the first place, right? So let's look at thirdly, why is it that the ability for neo-Nazis to establish another anti-Semitic movement by the point of reference of your particular historical sites being that. Before I move on, sure, Kelvin.
So just to clarify, we banned Holocaust museums.
Yeah, I think it's things that are just depicting the sort of trauma and horror of your particular Holocaust. If you take that out of the equation, I don't think that necessarily triggers a sort of emotion or trauma from your Jewish community. We're okay with that, right? So let's look at the ability for neo-Nazis to establish another Semitic movement. Because understand that the physical manifestation of the atrocities allows for the benchmark to point the power in which that they had at a particular point. It means that they can always point out to the historical site and say that, look, we got away with this particular human rights violation. We can get away with it again in the future per se. It's also the ability for them to like quantify the amount of people that they kill and say that, oh, this is how we got power. We killed this amount of people, and that's how we are going to remain controversial in that particular circumstance. We think that all of this only exists in a moment in which you have historical sites still in place, because they can always point on to that particular place to justify the sort of things that they're doing and say that, hey, look, I did that, I was able to get away with it in the end of the day. We think that what is the outcome of this, right? We think number one, it attracts more people to join the sort of movement because they understand that maybe anti-Semitic movements are a power to be reckoned with because you could have gotten away with those particular atrocities. Or secondly, you entrench a sort of anti-Semitic sentiment in them because these particular individuals can be able to actively justify the sort of actions and the outcomes they were done in a particular circumstance. How do we then think that this is particularly bad for Jewish communities? Because they are the ones who have to suffer through the particular discrimination, or people who are like Holocaust deniers are able to just tell them that, look, all of your ancestors died for nothing or things like that. These are sort of kind of trauma that they have to go through in the end of the day. And I think these are the sort of things also that would hinder them from entering into political discussions, right? Because when these people are always pointing towards them and saying that they're bad, it leads to an outcome of them unable to interact with these particular individuals, given that they're always defensive towards sort of things that's been thrown to them in the first place. We think that the world that we prefer is that these individuals who don't have to constantly be reminded of the sort of trauma that their ancestors go through in order for them to have a sort of more comfortable environment to interact with people and not having always that defensive stance to just push away sort of whatever people is telling them because of the fact that they feel that everything is an act of attack towards those individuals. We think that fundamentally this debate boils down to what is the best for your particular Jewish communities and how is it that they're able to utilize the platform that they have now to use it as leverage to ask for your politicians to give them things like healthcare per se, and not just look at themselves as Holocaust victims and why is it that at a point it's bad for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Please open the opposition to your proposition here.
It is cold.
Mr. Speaker, from ancient Egypt to the 18th century exodus of Jews from Spain down to the 1930s and 1940s, Jews have had a very, very hard life, right? And it is our right to give these people some representation and ability to form their community and use a reminder and as an anchor to what they have been through. Look, opposition tells you something, government tells you something that they're very, very true. They tell you that these places are sad reminders of the atrocities that were committed. These places are negative reminders. This is absolutely right, but we agree with this. We think it is absolutely necessary for these places to be there to strengthen the Jewish community as a whole and to keep their identity. They also tell you that, well, you can move these discussions offline, so to speak, right? Without these museums and historical places, these discussions could happen online as well. We think this exists on our side as well. Look, tour guides, their books exist in Holocaust museums, tour guides exist in these Holocaust museums. In general, you will be given information as to what has happened. If you want to argue that information could be corrupt, this is mutually exclusive to both sides. Look, the thing is, the principles that we stand behind is that we believe in the preservation of the culture of the Jewish people. We believe that destroying these sort of places would cause a lot of harms, and that this form of nationalism, although it may be a form of nationalism, is quite necessary. So to start, look, it is very important to preserve the identity of the hardships, of the discrimination, of the genocidal attempt to annihilate the entire race. It is very important to keep this identity intact, to keep this identity existent. Because why is this important? This preservation is a constant reminder. Look at how far the Jewish community has come. From the past, they've been indiscriminately killed, indiscriminately been victims of hate crime for nearly all of history, up until very recently. The struggles of this nation should be highlighted. The struggles of this nation should be shown in these forms. We should have these reminders. The problem is that the world had abandoned them. The world had, especially in the 1930s to 1940s, the world looked on, turned a blind eye to all the crimes that were happening within Nazi Germany, and did nothing. Even when Jews went to the US, they seek refuge. Absolutely no refuge was given to them. This is absolutely atrocious. It's just disgusting that these kind of things have happened. And with that being said, it is very important that we allow the Jewish community to independent and stand by itself, using its history as an anchor, or a reminder of, although it may have been a very difficult past for them, it is a past that is necessary to have in mind, because without the evidence, the anchor does not exist anymore. Without the evidence of what has happened, it is very easy to say that, we have moved on, which we do not believe in. This brings me to my second point. We think that taking away these places will concede to the message of Holocaust deniers, that it will play into their confirmation bias that, this might not have necessarily been a genocide. Perhaps this was just war casualties. This will play into the mindsets that these people already have. We think this is absolutely a major harm to this. More importantly, they do absolutely no justice to the survivors of Holocaust. How many people are alive? How many people have been through the atrocities of the Holocaust, have had their families gone through that? We're not that far from it. We think that taking away these places would be a big spit to the face of the people that have gone through these things. All is forgiven, all is forgotten. Guys, let's move on. This would not be fair to the people that have gone through this. And the message that this would tell the state is absolutely atrocious. They would see this as an injustice to the trauma they have experienced, right? The trauma that they have gone through is somehow invalidated by the destruction of these places. And even bigger, it sends a message to their community. It weakens the community, right? Because you don't have to be a nationalist to agree that the reminder of these atrocities is very much necessary. It's necessary to remember the things that they have gone through and the struggles that they encountered, any POIs. Moving on. My third point is why this form of nationalism why we think this form of nationalism is necessary. As I mentioned in my introduction, they have gone through thousands of years of indiscriminate discrimination. They have gone through thousands of years of genocidal and hate crimes and all of these things. And with that being said, we think that we deserve what has finally happened to them. And the fact is, they have finally got Israel. They have finally got a state to them. We think this is a very important milestone in the progress of the Jewish community. Without Israel, until Israel was given to the Jewish people, they have been displaced throughout their lives, right? They have been displaced from all over the world, and have had no home, no place to call their home. My final point is, I'd like to talk about the urgency. Why, especially now, it is incredibly important that we do not let these things slide. We do not forget about these things. With the sort of rise in Trump supporters in the West, we have seen a shift towards the right wing. A lot of right wing conservatives are not big fans of the Jewish communities. They do not like them, and we've seen this very recently, right? As in the Pittsburgh shooting, where 11 Jews were killed in the synagogue, and the response from the government was not adequate, right? So we already see that there's some form of bias against the Jewish people. By destroying these museums, by destroying these reminders of their past, you are further pushing the agenda of these people. You're allowing them more room to criticize the Jewish communities, right? So in this political landscape, we think that these crimes will increase more and more if the government chooses to pass this motion. Look, it's simply they need to stand, right? The Jews need to stand on their own, but also as communities as a whole, right? They use this community as a platform to rally behind all these politicians that are against them, all these politicians that are racist and anti-Semitic. So we think without this platform, the Jewish community would weaken. They would not be able to have that anchor that reminds them of the bravery that their ancestors have gone through, of the struggles their ancestors have gone through, and of the obligation of the future generations to preserve this memory, to preserve the importance of your history, because we cannot just look the other way and say that, let's forget about it. This is incredibly important. And with that being said, we're very, very happy to oppose.
Here, the House next legal opposition to this case of putting government and also significant crimes. Here.
Not only that this debate is about how is it that the Jewish community are able to be empowered to be able to meaningfully move on from the past, but also what kind of narratives, so what control and agency that they have past the Holocaust for them to be able to show the community what is the correct version of the Holocaust and what is the severity of the Holocaust and how that had impacted them in the first place, right? So that's how the debate should revolve around. So the first thing I'm going to respond to is the idea about the benefits that Jewish individuals can feel when they have these monuments. The first thing I want to talk about is that I think it's incredibly unclear from opening opposition onto why is it that opening opposition say that the absence of the monument and the sites can exclusively allow for Jewish individuals to freely express themselves. I think that the opposite is instead true, right? They have the right to feel free from any pain, regardless of they have the right to feel free from any pain at all. I think at the point where you walk around the monuments, for example, or you walk around the sites, knowing that your ancestors were horrible things will happen to your ancestors. That is more what is more likely to happen is that you're more likely to trigger the trauma that they have gone through in the past. And that deeply determines whether or not they feel comfortable to want to walk around society and be able to identify themselves as a Jewish person or not. Similarly like how the Yasukuni Shrine was also embedded in Japan, right? People feel afraid to talk about it because it reminds them of how horrible the Japanese treated their women in the past. If we're able to remove that site of reminder of that pain and that trigger of trauma, I think what you can do is you're more likely to empower them to come out and feel comfortable wanting to identify themselves as a Jewish person within society as well. I think, so next thing they said, what is injustice for us to remove the reminder of pain from the Jewish community? No, thank you. I think it becomes more injustice at the point where you impose more pain and the pain is more, and that pain is imposed on them more continuously in society as well. When you force them to see that the ancestors were there, the time that they were ripped apart from their mother's arms less than a century ago, that creates more injustices because you force them to look at that site that literally forces them, that literally like imposes all those pain to them as well. I think it becomes incredibly more injustice and unjust for you to allow these people to be subjected to those kinds of pains as well. Let's look at what opening government told you from the start. We think that the reminder does not have to come at the expense of the emotional as well as the psychological trauma of the victims as well as the generation of victims of the Holocaust. Can we get sustainable and effective reminder of the Holocaust? We'd say yes. There are multiple other alternatives where you can constantly remind society or constantly remind the world that the Holocaust did happen and that shouldn't happen in the first anymore as well. Things like you have your remember the Holocaust Remembrance Day, for example, where it is conducted annually. That people are still able to tell stories about what happened in the Holocaust, the things that they go through. Or you still have your interviews, for example, where you have the victims who were able to interview to tell you what actually happened, or what did their ancestors, what did their mom and grandmoms tell them about what happened in the Holocaust as well, assuming that they survived later, right? So, but I think that exclusively, the stories are more likely to be accurate because you don't lose the interpretation of Holocaust, because they have the agency to be able to control the kind of narratives that happens within society at the point where you lose sight of the monuments as well. But let's look at how else are we able to have that discussion as well. You still have social media where people are able to call out or like continue discussions about what happens in the past as well. So I don't think that the monuments or the sites are the only exclusive channel where people can talk about what happens in the past as well. This means that the sites are no longer necessary in 2018. We think that it is a pervasive reminder of what they felt in the past as well, because it triggers painful memories for them, and it determines whether or not they feel comfortable going on and interacting with the majority as well. It has to happen in the absence of the landmarks, because the landmarks because the existence of the landmarks allows the neo-Nazis or your far-right political parties to use it as a leverage against the Jewish community to tell you that, you deserve this because this is what our leaders were capable of before, right? Yeah.
So I realize this is a bit of a response, but who actually compels these people to go to Auschwitz and
Look, it doesn't have to come at the expense of you forcing yourself to go. The fact that you still have Jewish communities within, like Germany, for example, or live nearby, for example, or have social medias posting on those, have pictures about Auschwitz in the first place, that already compels them to have to face those memories as well, right? So I think what it means is that it's less likely for the Jewish individuals to feel comfortable in participating within the public as well. This comes in two things. Firstly, the ability for you to feel comfortable to, like, for example, wear your religious clothes, for example. You have the ability for you to freely identify yourselves as a Jewish individual without having to face the risk of getting your hate thrown against you, to get your anti-Semitic statements being thrown against your face. So that's first. So you don't have to be reminded of that pain, right? But the second thing is that if you make them more uncomfortable because of the reminder that was triggered before, then it also undermines the ability for them to be able to participate in political discussion as well. That means that at the point where they are uncomfortable to want to talk with your white majorities, for example, then they are less likely able to demand for their rights. They are less likely to want to persuade your, for example, local municipal council to reinstate anti-hate laws, for example, hate speech laws, for example. So that's the exclusive benefit that we get as well. But I think there's the third thing that wasn't engaged from open opposition, which was the exclusive benefit as well, right? How the presence of the monuments doesn't allow for the Jewish individuals to be able to have control of the narrative of what happens within those monuments and those sites as well. So at the point where those sites exist, it breeds assumptions of what had happened during the Holocaust. That means that the allowance of different interpretations of what happened during the Holocaust. And so if you allow for different interpretations to happen, the interpretation is more likely to be in favor of the white majorities. That means that they are more able to scapegoat the discussion when Jewish individuals want to demand rights from them by saying that, well, we pull you out from the sites anyway, so what else do you want from us right now? That means that you are less able to hold the governments accountable and force governments to participate, because now governments can use that monument as a leverage to tell you that we don't need to do any more further for you. That coupled with the extremely hostile political climate that happens in the US and the EU as well, the fact that far-right political parties are becoming more visible and winning in states as well, that means that yes, there's less ability for the Jewish individuals to be able to talk to your local politicians as well. At least in the absence of the site, the Jewish community don't lose control over the ability for them to shape the narrative, to tell you what actually happened and why is it that the Holocaust shouldn't have happened in the first place as well. That's the benefit, and I think Open Opposition needs to respond to that as well. Thanks.
We hear the last night's BPM through the opening half and close case, and also that's the other opinion.
I think the opening government has completely missed the point when they say that they are willing to protect, in order to protect the Jewish identity, then there is a necessary need to destroy these particular monuments just because other people have different interpretation of what's happening. And the matter of fact is that all the interpretation that you see in media is given by the survivors of this Holocaust. But at the same time, they want to limit the very discussion to those very limited amount of people because they want to say that they want to protect the integrity of it. We think that when the Jewish community decided to stop talking about the Holocaust, I think that's an inherently disgrace to all the oppression and all the discrimination that happened within the Jewish community, especially in the time where attacks against the Jewish community and sort of discrimination is all-time high after the far-right movement has empowered white supremacists, right? We think that in the best interest of the Jewish community, I think that they need a rally cry to stand behind, and I think that rally cry is to rally behind the sort of atrocities, and nothing will clearly show the atrocities. It's just having the physical place and all these things has been committed on, right? Because that is 100% complete proof of all the things that is the epitome of the discrimination against the Jewish community, and we think that the Jewish community has to protect it for their own future as a constant reminder that how the world has failed them. Right? Before that, two rebuttals. The first rebuttal is like the idea of the survivors, and I feel uncomfortable coming out and to live a normal life. First of all, we say that Jewish community do exist, and these people doesn't necessarily need to stay exactly next to the memorial, like the Auschwitz itself. And second of all, even if media do like the so-called like social media shows attack these people, we think that it's still the Jewish community to fall back on. And also, you also in the return strengthen the Jewish community itself, because it tells them constantly that there's a need to unify against the hate that is constantly going against them, right? It perpetuates the idea that we need to stand together, that each of us are not immune, no matter where we are not immune to the attacks, even if they want to advocate and say suddenly if you demobilize Auschwitz, they haven't proved to us like why this everyday hate, why suddenly right-wing politicians or conspirators suddenly will let go the idea that Jews are hate against Jews. That wasn't entirely proven, and we think that outside proof. And on the second point on control narrative, where it's a close discussion and how you stop some neo-Nazi from misinterpreting. First of all, we think that having Auschwitz have contained the accounts of thousands and millions of accounts of trauma. We think that's clear far proof, right? We don't think that under their side, the sort of narrative, right? We think this narrative is to be hijacked by scholars, especially in this case, we will include those scholars who deny Holocaust that exists in regardless, right? That means that you have to also forgo the harm because the your side maybe mentioned, but we'll compare it why other side, your side is much worse, right? Before, what I'm going to give you engagement point. First of all, I tell you how on the other side we better move on. Have better move on. Secondly, tell you why on the outside we have better platform to stand against it. And thirdly, talk about the neo-Nazi movement and they want to put this focus on. First of all, how the community should move on. We think that the best move to move on is to unify the Jewish community under a specific cause. To tell them, given the narrative that the fact that the world has forsaken them for a lot of time, that means that they themselves cannot represent the representatives of the state, especially in the case of America. Like this Jewish community needs to stand up for their own and need to involve themselves in politics. That means that survivors of Holocaust need to stand out in public hall, town hall hearing and call out those racist politicians, right? To stand in the middle of the hall to share their stories and tell them that they themselves are the living proof that hate against Jews do exist and will also continue to exist, right? This sort of participation is to ensure that history won't repeat again, and that's the own obligation that these people own, and this sort of movement can that having these Auschwitz monuments what incentivizes these survivors to continuously involve themselves in politics. Because every time they see the picture, every time they show them the picture of Auschwitz, they have to remind them of trauma. And then the next thing they do, they think about the people, the community that helped them, the Jewish community that helped them go through all that. That means they give them obligation. Now, next how we move on the platform. Why on the outside when we have this monument, it's a better platform? Because each movement needs a rally cry, right? It's something to rally cry on. And we think that rally cry when we use this sort of hardship is more highly effective. Because as a matter of fact, if the young generations, right, when we send them to this Auschwitz, we send them to this. So to send it to these monuments, the place that actually happens, they're able to resonate the sort of hardship, the fact that their grandparents or their great-grandfathers has solved, right? The matter of fact that they walk through the hallways of death, to see how the people are being cramped, then this sort of incentivize these young people, young Jewish people to stand up for support and to stand up against the sort of racism that we write with politics that the world try to paint out, right? And this kind of time, why on the other side we're better to counter neo-Nazism itself. Because no matter what, both sides, neo-Nazi will exist. Then the comparative is which side is able to target them, which side is able to engage them better. We think that under our side, where we will proven you how the platform incentivizes young Jews instead of hiding, right? Hiding against these troll attacks. Now they're standing out. We're telling you that how the Jewish survivors further encourage future young generation to join in and to fight against the narrative. But also we tell you that you also pressure the state, right? Because a state like Germany, Auschwitz and this monument stands as a reminder the fact that your people has failed the Jewish community, right? The fact that your government will always be painted as a sort of brutal fascist that sponsored genocide. And we think this sort of counterbalances ensures that the Jewish community can able live on. So what we concluded today, right? Let's talk about OL. We think it's very important to reinforce the narrative that the Jewish community, that this hardship needs to be remembered by not only remembered and shouldn't be forgotten, right? And in order to protect their own rights on their own and their future, right? They need to stand up for themselves and they need something really private. And we say that this monument is partly what they need to use, right? With that, proud to oppose.
Here is the house next to the whole and the opening half, or the closing half, Thank you. Sorry.
Cool. Let's flip the arguments from opening opposition, and I think it's also true that the only physical remnant of Nazi Germany would be these monuments. That it is also true that Nazi Germany was able to mechanize their whole people into creating these death camps in order for them to persecute 6 million Jews because they seem to think that they are beneath the Aryan race and they should be punished because somehow they corrupt the European economy. I think it's important for us to understand what should be the interests of the Jewish community then. Because I think the biggest threat of the Jewish community is not only anti-Semitism, also rise of Nazism, not only in Europe, but also in the US. I think it culminated with the death of 11 people who survived the Holocaust, but died at the hands of a person who was inspired by Nazi Germany. I think that's a threat that opening opposition needs to deal with. So I think I have two unique extensions. The first is to explain why these symbols give rise to Nazi narratives and why uniquely that's a harm towards the Jewish community. I think the opening government touched a bit but didn't explain why is this important. But I think secondly also is to explain how because of these monuments, the Jewish community can't move on. I think the example to that would be Israel when Benjamin Netanyahu used fear and uncertainty to couch the Jewish community into perpetuating suffering just because they have suffered before. And I think that's a harm in this way that is important. But before that, let's just deal with opening opposition because I think they are a bit of a mess because I think they don't have a specific goal of why that these monuments must exist. They have two. The first thing they said was, you need this for education. Firstly, I think that education is not mutually exclusive. Then they need to uniquely explain why is this symbols important. I think opening government did explain why symbols are bad, but I think closing government will extend this further. Firstly, one, that symbols are abstract. It depends on an individual level to interpret what those symbols mean. For a Jewish person, it could mean suffering, but to a Nazi, it could mean a symbol of triumph that Nazi Germany did was able to persecute 6 million Jews. Or to white supremacists, they may think that Auschwitz is a remnant of the attempt to breed out the Aryan race, to breed out impurities of races in the world. So insofar as how symbols are often abstract, I don't think the opening government may not necessarily get the benefits that they want. But second, I just don't get it. I think that the Jewish community can also educate people on how terrible the Auschwitz, the Holocaust were. I think that they can have pictures of the people who died because of the Holocaust. I think that they can have people telling stories about what happened in the Holocaust. I think that museums can still exist, but I think that we do not have to have a physical remnant of extermination. I think that they need to defend what is unique about that. But thirdly, I think that the Jewish community can also argue that it is bad for people to single us out for our identity, stop persecuting us because of our identity. They can still get sympathy for people to care about their cause, to care about hate crimes, to care about the persecution that they might go through today. I think that they can still do that independent of this monument. So I think the benefits, given that it's not mutually exclusive, we can still have that too. So they can argue that's exclusive. But second, now they want to argue that neo-Nazis can argue. We can easily defeat neo-Nazis because we can point them to symbols of Auschwitz, to the camps in Poland and say, you did this, you must suffer for what you have done, your narratives will never work. Three things to say to that. Firstly, I think that Holocaust denial will still exist in both sides, but I think that Holocaust denial becomes far worse in your world because they can say, instead of attributing Jewish extermination to suffering, they will attribute the Jewish extermination as an attempt to, I don't know, be successful in eradicating a minority race. They will likely say that, no, the Aryan race was more superior. That's why we needed these camps to be vacant. I think that they're able to give credibility to their argument because they're able to pinpoint these symbols and say, we have attempted, we failed. That's why the Jews are so powerful. That's why they ruin our economy. That is what the narrative that neo-Nazis are going to be able to hijack with the existence of these memorials. But second, insofar as a neo-Nazi is able to say it and use it as a symbol of triumph, you are less likely going to be able to argue more effectively because again, given that these symbols are abstract, it's harder for you to convince a neo-Nazi because they're likely going to still associate these symbols with triumph, and I think that you're less able to change their minds. At least in our world, when you don't have these symbols all together, it's easier for you to use lived experiences of survivors of the Holocaust or just common decency to argue why they shouldn't be singled out. I think that we can do it better in our world. So firstly, let's just uniquely argue why the rise of anti-Semitism is uniquely tied to these symbols. Firstly, Because Nazis are emboldened by the existence of these symbols, right? To them, it's a triumph because these symbols are used to invoke a specific identity of you singling out Jews for the inferior race because they're inferior. It becomes a visceral reminder of the successes of Nazi Germany trying to persecute 6 million Jews. You give credibility to their arguments, and I think what could possibly happen is two things. One, that you're able to dehumanize the Jews because neo-Nazis can dehumanize the Jews and say their identity will always be attached to these symbols. We have 6 million of your ancestors being persecuted in these monuments. You dehumanize the Jews and it implies there's always associated with something, associated them in always. So a Jewish person cannot be able to avoid that association that's always a symbol of the past. That's your narrative on the inspired people that was happening because we inspired by these Pakistani to themselves. I want to replicate the success of extermination Jews and then single out Jewish communities and single gospel of all. The scale of power is powerful because the Jewish community can't possibly predict which Jewish communities they are different type. Insofar, are people being singled out to their identity and people being inspired because of these monuments? I think far worse harms can happen. But second, let's talk about Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu was able to use fear and uncertainty to catch the Jewish population to support him because he can say, if you don't support me, you will face the same suffering as your ancestors. That's why he was able to stay into power. People are willing to let go of his corruption scandal. People are willing to let go of his atrocities towards the Palestinian people because people think to themselves that Benjamin Netanyahu is the reason why he's safe. They are safe. If we remove that, we are able to keep Benjamin Netanyahu accountable. I think Imam will explain that later. Never been so proud to propose.
Thanks, the member of government, House of Member of Opposition, to open for speaking. That was not working.
No? Yeah.
Let me try it, and I not present this.
Can you just like use it?
Let me just, yeah. Sometimes I cannot control
Instead of
the
something you can just mute it.
Like
Well, you don't need physical evidence of history to prove that it happened in history. There are a lot of things that happened in the past where we don't have physical evidence of, but despite of that, people still believe that it happened. There was still no denial of it happening. It's things like, for example, extermination of the Native American, for example. It's things like, for example, the Armenian genocide, for example. These are things that don't have physical representation, but it does not have as much denial as Holocaust has in there. So what does this mean? This means that it doesn't matter whether or not you have physical evidence or not. What matters is the interpretation that happens surrounding the events that occurred in the past. And we tell you, the existence of the physical evidence created a far worse interpretation of what happened. It created a far worse discourse surrounding the Holocaust, and we think ultimately that must end. So a few issues in this debate. Firstly, let's deal with how exactly do we clamp down on right-wing and anti-Semites. And I'll exclusively point out where exactly is different in Fred's analysis that won us this debate. But secondly, I'll deal with Calvin and tell you why are there other alternatives for the Jewish community to remind the world of their suffering, and why ultimately the physical manifestation of the suffering is the worst form of a way for you to remind them. So firstly, clamp down on right-wing anti-Semites. The first is that this was the deadlock that happened in the opening exchange. Opening government tells us that you allow for misrepresentation by the right-wing anti-Semites, and opening opposition tells us historical sites are necessary for you to fight against anti-Semites because you have reminders of what the Germans did to the Jews. Firstly, we say that the opening government didn't sufficiently explain how exactly misrepresentation happened, but secondly, how exactly that they are able to curb misrepresentation. But what were the things that Fred explained exclusively that answered this question? The fact that Fred told you that interpretation of these historical sites is subjective, and it allows for any individual to have their own interpretation. It allows for an average Jew to say that it's a visual representation of their grandfathers or grandparents suffering, but it allows for like outright individuals to say that it's a glorification of the Aryan race. We were strong and we killed the Jews and the weaker race. What does this mean then? It allows for neo-Nazis to hijack the Jewish suffering and to empower the neo-Nazis, and to say things like, yes, the Germans did it right, we killed the Jews, that's what we are supposed to do. But secondly, you give legitimacy to their arguments because there are gas chambers, there are concentration camps, there are evidence of the extermination of the powers that the Germans used to extinguish the Jews. That's why the individuals like the Pittsburgh shooter was able to feel inspired by these symbols, because he saw it as a glorification of the Aryan race. He saw it as a symbol of strength of the Germans, and that's why he felt that it was within his power to continue the power of the Germans. But lastly, the fact that you dehumanize the Jews. This was completely unresponded by Calvin. The fact that your identity of the Jewish identity is now completely associated to pain, completely associated to being a victim of the Germans' atrocities, completely associated to weakness, even with the state. Even with the Israeli state, you are still weak because you are unable to get your own power, your own state. We allow individuals like the Pittsburgh shooter to dehumanize the Jews even more and say that these individuals, this race is weak and they will never be in power. In conclusion, we show to you levels of analysis how historical sites proliferates the rise of anti-Semitism. That's why we were more relevant than opening government. But let's talk about other alternatives for the Jewish community to remind the world of their suffering. We think this completely answers what Calvin said, because Calvin said that, interpretations will still continue, but the only difference is that you don't have a physical manifestation, physical evidence. I think the physical evidence, the absence of that physical evidence is very important in this debate, because OG tells us, okay, there are education, there's social media, but I think it was sensitive and not explaining why it's better. But we tell you, even though interpretations will exist in both sides, I think outside the house, it will be in a sober room, it will be in a sober discussions as in education, with like reference to textbooks, with reference to academia, and we think it's far better because A, it's not emotional, it's devoid of any emotion or physical trauma that individuals have. Therefore, the discussion that will likely happen will likely not going to be one that is antagonizing or me against us against you. But secondly, it's devoid of political sentiment. That means you say it as it is, as an educational form to inform individuals that, hey, the Jews suffered because the Germans were because they are trying, you're Nazis. Contrast that where discussions will completely be clouded by your emotions. We think oftentimes the discourse wouldn't be healthy before that should.
So the vast majority of contemporary neo-Nazis want anti-Semitism celebrate killing 6 million Jews from the gas chambers. Wouldn't this just be something that just detracts from their cause and makes them more shameful to the vast majority of society?
I think it's untrue that they don't celebrate the death of those Jews. They do celebrate that. That's why they were anti-Semites. The reason why they believed that the Jews were inferior was because they believed that in white supremacism that they are the Aryan race was superior. I don't understand why is it that they don't glorify the race, glorify the Holocaust. But lastly, we say that. Contrast that to their world, where discussions will never be healthy because it will be clouded by emotion, it will be clouded by political sentiment. Therefore, you're more likely to have right-wing individuals who are emotional, who feel like they need to take you down, and they feel like they are superior than you. The discussion that will happen will never be healthy, and will always be toxic. Proud to.
Okay, now thanks to God, please. Closing up space. Open again.
Yeah.
So like it's a sign and
the best interest and the best outcome for the Jewish community is the continuation of the sympathy that they have received as a result of the Holocaust, right? For example, things like increased and easier access towards integration within Western liberal societies as a result of the sympathy they got as survivors when they first crossed over to the United States, to the UK, maybe, right? The increased access towards the mainstream of these particular countries, right? As where they gradually became whitened, if I may say, right? And they're seen as less of a minority compared to other minorities. These are things that have enfranchised the Jewish community. These are things that have placed the Jewish community's interests probably within that given political will to like Jewish interests and stuff like that. I think the best interest of the Jewish community is to preserve these things. And at a point in which you remove evidence, you remove the site of these particular things from happening, we think the Jewish community is less likely to be able to preserve it. So Gov tells you a few things, right? That the best interest of Jews is safety against anti-Semitism, against neo-Nazis. And we hear this a lot more in CG, right? They tell you that neo-Nazis gain inspiration from these sites, right? And therefore you have like people committing like the lone wolf attacks against like these 11 Holocaust survivors. Like, I'm still not really sure how this inspiration come to be just because like there's Auschwitz, so I must go and commit like copycat murders. I'm still unsure as to how this link is done, right? But secondly, Jewish interest cannot just be about preventing lone wolf attacks, right? Because Calvin brought you this premise that for these neo-Nazis, being attached to the image of Holocaust is really bad for their image, right? Because we think the most dangerous neo-Nazis are the ones that are smart enough to gain followers, to gain access to the political mainstream, to get some political power, right? And they do that oftentimes by detaching themselves from the image of the Holocaust, right? By detaching themselves from the image of the people who killed 6 million Jews very gruesomely, right? Because these are images that has been just scalded into the minds of people to be disgusting, right? That is politically incorrect for people to attach themselves to these ideas, these images, right? That if you do, you are never able going to get following. So as long as the sites still stand, we don't think it's easy for these neo-Nazis to detach themselves, because there's always the evidence. We can point at them and say, you are labeling yourselves after these people, you cannot detach themselves. The next thing they wanted to talk about was this idea of interpretation of Holocaust, right? They're telling you that, the sites are very abstract, right? That people, different kind of people can lay claim to the interpretation of the Holocaust. But and there are different interpretation, right? So that, like, their comparative is having books. Their comparative is having museums. And the reason they say it's better is because, you can have a very calm and unemotional discussion about these issues. I'm not sure why that is true, right? Because if the comparative is, like, if there are different interpretations within these structures, there are also differing interpretations within books as well, right? You have your very establishment author, your very academic author, but then you also have your very far right, your very anti-Semitic authors as well, right? Where do you draw the line between which is authoritative or which is not, right? Which is fiction and which is non-fiction, right? Because at the very least, at the point in which you have a structure, right, that is most oftentimes maintained by the government, right, or by an authoritative body, what you are able to do is you are able to get an authoritative figure, an authoritative, like, maybe approval of the version that is most commonly accepted to be true, right? That doesn't really leave any space for argumentation as to what exactly happened, right? You are able to have like a government that you are able to have like the narrative that is painted by someone who's at the very least authoritative, and not one that you leave to be up to grabs by two different sides of the divide. Right? Then let's talk about a few like extraneous rebuttals, right? Closing tells you that the Benjamin Netanyahu uses fear to control the people, to get more people. Like, why is this fear only in existence when you have these sites? I still don't get what this argument is about.
Right. So given that the different interpretations do exist in society, the difference is how much control can the Jewish community take in order to reshape the narrative to in their favor, to tell you what is the correct interpretation and correct history of what happened. How can you get that from the Jewish
Yeah. So, which is what you said in your speech, right? You said in your speech that, oh, you cannot control interpretation because the white majority controls interpretation. But we think there is a skill, right? Because there are signages, there are leaflets within these sites, they are printed by the state, right, or by a governing body of some sort. That means the story is at least comes in a reverential tone towards the victims, right? That's respecting the victims. It's not denying the fact, right? And is at least authoritative. I think without it, you have various books, you have various interpretations, you have even denial, right? And I think if you want to talk about the ability of the Jewish people to control, I think it's easier for the Jewish people to lobby a particular state government or particular authoritative body to include a particular narrative than it is for the Jewish community to control the various many different publishers of many different books claiming different interpretations, right? So I think with this existence of these structures and these sites, it's easier for the Jewish state, for the Jewish community to control the interpretation of how these sites are looked at, not just by books, not just by museums. The Jewish people need to own their history.
Wait, I'm going what's your name?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
What is Brooklyn baby, right?
Yeah.